I'll start by saying welcome to everybody and thank you for being here. But as we get started, we'll do a lesson on treasures in heaven, which in no means is a new lesson for any of us, I'm sure. It's not a new concept, and I'm sure it's something we've all had in our thoughts before. And either way, I pray that we'll get something out of it, and we can at least think about the things that are going to be presented. Our main text for this morning is going to be from Matthew chapter 6, verses 19 through 21. We probably already know these verses by heart, and you probably could have recalled them before I even brought the slide up here, but we'll read it and we'll go through the lesson together. In chapter 6 of Matthew, verses 19 through 21, Jesus says, "Lay not up for yourselves treasures upon earth, where moth and rust doth corrupt, and where thieves break through and steal. Instead, but lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust doth corrupt, and where thieves do not break through nor steal." And then he goes on to say, "For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also." We're going to start in verse 19 and break it down to a degree. He says, "Lay not up for yourselves treasures upon earth, where moth and rust doth corrupt, and where thieves break through and steal." You have to remember that corruptible means things that don't last. They're perishable. So we wonder, what are these treasures that Jesus says are corruptible and can be stolen from us that we don't want to lay up? First, we look at what a treasure is. Treasure is something that we value, we hold dear to us in some cases. We put a lot of effort towards our treasures. Thayer's definition says it's the place in which good and precious things are collected and laid up. So let's think about some of the corruptible treasures that we have in our lives today. And just bear with me as I go through these things, because in the beginning it may seem I'm pointing fingers, but I'm absolutely not. So first we'll look at the physical treasures that we have around us and put around us. Some of the physical things we put around us are some of our awards or trophies. Maybe from winning a race, or maybe you got Employee of the Year or something of the sort. Something that we've done, and we've gained this physical item, and now we have this treasure showing that we have accomplished something. Maybe for some, they have a large bank account that they're proud of. We know that money can be the root of all evil, but it's something that we all need, but it's something we need to keep in check. Other treasures we might have around us is something that we've been passed down to us from our parents or grandparents, or even beyond that. This could be anything as simple as just a book, or maybe a quilt, or a pocket knife, maybe even tools from your father. They're probably out of date, but they still mean something to us. And then we have the ones that we have invested our money and time in. Things like a car, or a boat, a camper, a dirt bike. I don't think any of us have one, but even a swimming pool. These are things that we do have jobs, and we've earned money, and we put them towards these things. And I want us to continue to remember that just because I say it's a treasure doesn't mean that that's where our minds are and that's the only thing we care about. Not the only thing we care about, but at least these are things that we do appreciate and we do have around us to enjoy. Then I want to think about things that we've invested our time in. In my case, I would say my yard. I've invested a lot of time into my yard, trying to make it green and pretty. It does tie into my job, but I've let it carry over into my own lawn, trying to make it look nice. Some it may be a garden, or to some it may even be something as simple as a model car. These are things that we have around us that we appreciate and that we care about. But there's also some non-physical things that we would consider to be treasures. Things like skills. We put time and effort into learning skills such as how to build a house, or how to crochet, how to use a computer, how to do things that provide for us, even in our jobs, even. These are things we invest in, and I would easily consider these as treasures. Then also knowledge. And then some situations can be kind of boastful in this area, but that's not necessarily where we are. But we invest a lot of time in our knowledge. We watch the news to see what's going on around the world. We learn history. And some really get a kick out of politics. They spend a lot of time trying to learn all they can about politics and what's going on in the world, and even forming opinions on it. And then we also have relationships that we would treasure. This may be our physical family, it could be our neighbors, it could be co-workers, it could just be friends that we've had for a long time. Now we have to remember that we need to constantly be reminding ourselves that, and each other, that we don't want to over-invest in our earthly treasures that we've just discussed, our corruptible treasures, things that are going to be leaving us when we leave this world. We need to consider how we spend our time on these things, and how the time we spend and the money we spend relate to salvation of ourselves and others. These are spiritual aspects. Now I can go on and come out and say that there's nothing wrong with these treasures that we have. There's nothing wrong with maintaining a beautiful yard, or growing the nicest tomatoes, or cheering on your favorite race car driver, or buying a new vehicle. There's nothing wrong with these things, and Jesus is not telling us we can't enjoy these things. However, if we let it happen, these things would be wrong if we let them lead to a neglect of the spiritual things, the things that are our duty as Christians. And I had one example come to my mind, found in Acts chapter 6. We'll read verses 1 and 2. And in those days, when the number of the disciples was multiplied, there arose a murmuring of the Grecians against the Hebrews, because their widows were neglected in the daily ministration. Now, I would say perhaps the Hebrews were spending too much time pruning their cactuses, washing their chariots, or they may have spent all their money on donkeys, or they were too concerned about getting to the Colosseum to watch the gladiators beat each other up to see who's better and who would win. And this does seem somewhat humorous and probably inaccurate, but the point is that we don't want to give too much attention to our treasures here on earth and not have enough room for other things that we need to be doing. I would say in the Grecians' case, maybe the Hebrews were fighting against these things, pulling them in the wrong direction. But I would say in some sense they had to have their priorities out of whack to not already have these be storing their treasures in heaven, by providing for those widows. Yeah, so the point is, we don't want to give too much of ourselves toward the things that help no one enter into the strait gate. And we all are familiar with that passage. So here's the catch to it. Jesus says, lay not up for yourselves treasures upon earth. Well, what does this saying lay up mean? Lay up can mean gather or heap up or store up. Jesus is putting it in the negative. Don't store up, don't heap up these treasures on earth. The phrase gives us the impression to have an abundance, to store enough to last. And Jesus is telling us not to store up so much and not to have an abundance of these things. Doesn't mean we can't have them, we just need to keep them in check. And I believe he says that to us because if we fill our storehouses up with these things, we won't have room for the things that are coming up in the next verse, verse 20. We read Matthew chapter 6, verse 20. He says, but lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust doth corrupt, and where thieves do not break through and steal. So this is a stark contrast to the things that we just talked about. Jesus wants us to have things here on earth. He provides things for us. God created all things for our enjoyment. But it's up to us to keep them in check. So let's think about what are these things that we value or our treasures that Jesus is talking about is incorruptible or everlasting and cannot be stolen from us. I would say this is going to be all the things that we accomplish while here on earth that does benefit us after we physically pass away or does benefit others around us. I'll just move on. When thinking about treasures that Jesus wants us to lay up and abound in, heap up, store up, what should we be considered? What should be considered to be those treasures in heaven? And the first one that came to my mind, other than our own salvation, the greatest treasure I can think of is spending time with somebody in a Bible study and let them learn from the Bible how to be saved. To watch that person learn the truth and obey the gospel and become a Christian who's going to have salvation. Salvation leading them to heaven and spending eternity with God. There's nothing better. There's no better treasure that I can think of aside from my own salvation than leading somebody else to do the same. And I think we would all agree that Jesus spent most of his time on earth teaching us to love God, love others, show mercy, and do good deeds to all those around us. If we go back and read chapter 5, which we can do that in our own time, we'll find these things in example from Jesus. And I don't think above these things Jesus would think in any other treasure to be greater in heaven. So Jesus contrasted the treasures here on earth versus the treasures in heaven. Let's do some thinking and contrast some of our own treasures and compare it to what we would rather have. So let's say you do find somebody who's interested in a study and wants to learn more about what we teach differently than denominations. We have somebody that's actively wanting to find out more about God. Now, would you tell them, I don't have time to study because I've been waiting all week for this race. It's getting ready to come on this afternoon, and well, they're about to start, so maybe we can postpone until next week, or maybe tomorrow. Now, I've never found myself in this situation, but it very well could happen. Maybe somebody came to me and it's been raining and I haven't been able to get to my yard and it's really high and it needs mowed. What if I told them, well, it's almost dark, I've got to go cut my grass? These are the examples of treasures on earth that we don't want to store. We don't want to invest all our time into our earthly treasures. Again, I want to emphasize that there is nothing per se wrong with these treasures that we've gathered up, but we don't want to store them up. We don't want to heap them up. And while there is nothing wrong with having nice things and spending time on our hobbies, we must take heed not to let these things trump our desire for the spiritual needs around us. And now we move to verse 21. Jesus says, "For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also." If we think about this passage, Matthew 6:19 through 21, I really can't think of a much better passage to really meditate on. I know Tony's used that phrase in his lessons. Well, I think it's really good for us to meditate when we find passages like this. For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. So we would want to ask ourselves, do those around us know where our heart is? Now, I do think we're pretty obvious about our religion and how we believe. But do they see it? Do they see it in us? Do they see us spending more time on earthly things? Do they see us putting our efforts and our thoughts towards heavenly things? Do they see us being more worried about our stuff rather than spreading the truth? And while we're on this subject, I have in myself noticed this, that I have a lot of conversations with my customers, and most of the time those conversations are simply about lawn care or landscaping, and I've noticed that I've missed opportunities to speak the gospel, preach the gospel, and ask them how their spirituality is. It just never seems to be the right time or the right moment or the right situation. So it's something that I watch myself for, and I hope that we can all be that way. Any opportunity we have to spread the truth is an opportunity we need to take. We want to keep our focus on pleasing God. If we see our hearts starting to lean the wrong way, we've got to be prepared to do whatever it takes to get back on the righteous path. In some cases, we need to be loving enough to each other to help each other in this regard, even if we think it's going to upset each other. Sometimes we can't see our own faults and we need others to point them out to us. It's something we know, but it's not something that's easy, but we definitely need to work on it and keep it in our minds that we do need help. So even going beyond storing up these heavenly treasures like we desire to do, we have to take it a step further. And if we go back to the beginning of chapter 6, we'll learn that we got to do it with the right motivations. Matthew 6 verse 1 says, "Take heed that you do not your alms before men to be seen of them, otherwise you have no reward of your Father which is in heaven." Alms being the things that are just good deeds to those around you. We want to do these things because we love God, not because we want to get affection of men or to impress anybody. As I'm getting closer to the end of my lesson, I want us to consider, why are we putting up these signs around the building and down the road to try to invite people to our assemblies? Why are we telling people, hey, come join us? I hope it's not this case. Some may want to say it's just because we want to raise our numbers and say, we've been through a tough situation in the past. Maybe some of us may be tempted to say, well, look at our numbers. We're growing. That proves that we're not weaker. That proves that we're doing what we're supposed to do, and we're doing it to show them that they were wrong. I would still say that's the wrong intentions. I would say this is more of our situation. I think we all understand this. However, we know we're to invite people so that they can hear the gospel. That's why we're putting up these signs. That's why we're inviting people here. Not to raise our numbers. That's God's job. Our job is to teach them, to present it to them. We invite people in so they can have a place to go if they're seeking the truth. We invite people in so that we can help them with their spiritual needs, so that they can see the church that they read about in the Bible. Now, I want to emphasize that on the outside, we all look like we have it all together, but we need to be aware that we do need to share our difficulties with each other. We are family, and we can talk to each other, we can share problems, and we can share our thoughts and concerns for each other. And I think it's something that's very lacking in the church today, not just here, or not even here, but I would like to at least extend myself, say that if you have something against me, please share it with me. And I'll do my best to share it with you. So, if anybody has any concerns or anything that they'd like to share with us, just come forward as we have our song of invitation.